Today I want to talk to you about mules. Betty and I went on vacation with her parents to the Smoky Mountains, Appalachia, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and Pigeon Forge. We gommed around in that area for a couple of days and took what we called a vacation. Now, her mom and dad paid for practically everything. We were young and didn't have any money to speak of. Shannon was a little girl. I'm pretty sure this was before Heather was born, so I'm going to say pre-1969. Sure many of you have been to that area, and it's not changed a whole lot. So the area's expanded and grown some, but Appalachia's Appalachia. The Smoky Mountains are there. A lot of the country's rural. A lot of the folks there, they or their families lived there for years and years. And a lot of those people are, let's call them artists. They maybe paint pictures or draw pictures or do other artisan type things like make baskets, and they have all kinds of crafts and things that they make. And in that area, back in those days, you saw it all the time in about every restaurant you stopped in, or every roadside stand, or just wherever people could park and set up a table or work out of the back of their wagon or their truck. They had something for sale there. And while we were on this trip, in one of the places that we stopped at, there was a picture for sale done by a local artist, and it was a mule. And I really liked it. I liked that mule, and I thought, wow, I'd like to have that. What's this person want for the mule that they painted? And I looked at it, and it was $80. $80, you know, I'd have give that for it in a heartbeat today. And probably if I'd have bought it back then, a piece of local artwork, original signed artwork and dated, probably be worth well more than that. Nowadays, if I'd bought it then, kept it in good shape. But I didn't buy it. I couldn't have bought it if it's $15. I didn't have that kind of money. But I liked it a lot. And after I saw it, I began paying more attention to some of the things as we moved around and as we stopped at different places. And on that trip, I'd say I found 4 or 5, maybe 6 different paintings of mules. Seemed to be a popular item for the local people to use as subjects for their paintings. Mules and horses and donkeys and things like that. But I'd say I found a half a dozen mules on that trip. I never did find one, I don't think, any cheaper than the $80. They range somewhere between $80 and $125. Might as well have been $1 million to me, because I didn't have that kind of money to spend on something like that. But it caused me to think about mules and mule pictures. And I'm 79 years old today, and I still like mule pictures. And last year, late summer, early fall, I was at an auction, and part of the contents of this auction were what resulted from, or what was left over from, the closing of a store or a gallery where they sold artwork. In this particular instance, it was a print of an original artwork that was numbered and signed. And there were several different artists represented in this auction, but the majority of the work was by a man named, I believe his first name's Charles, but he signs with his first initial C, his middle name Don, and his last name Ensor, E-N-S-O-R. Probably most of you never heard of the guy, but he was not local, but he was from Kentucky. I think he lived most of his adult life in and around Louisville. And he had other jobs. He's an interesting man. put his name into a Google search and learn about him. I'm not going to tell you all about him, but he's an interesting person. And he was a good artist. I liked a lot of his work. In fact, before I ever saw the collection that they had that day at the auction, I had owned some pictures that he'd done. There's one right over there on the wall that I featured in a earlier video when I was talking about my childhood in Arkansas and making homemade ice cream on Aunt Edith's front porch. There's a picture over there. It's an old ice cream mixer, and it's got peaches and strawberries there with it. And those are two of the things that we had at Aunt Edith's. They made homemade ice cream, and in there in the kitchen, in a big bowl, was cut up peaches and cut up strawberries, and you could pick which one you wanted in your ice cream. You could even put both in your ice cream when we had homemade ice cream there. I made a video about that, and that picture is a work by C. Don Ensor. I digress. They had this auction, and they had stacks and stacks of limited edition prints. And they had lots of other stuff at the auction too, and so they were going around doing like they do. It's down at Robinson's. You know how Stephen is. He wants to sell choice on everything. The whole group of them. I've said it before, I'll say it again. When I'm bidding on something and they're selling choice, I only bid about 70% of what I would have bid if they were selling what I wanted. Well, this day they were selling everything like that. They had 4 or 5 tables up there in front of the podium, and they were going from one person to another selling choice. And on one table they had all these prints from some shop where they sold numbered prints. And there were, I'm going to say, hundreds of them. But in and amongst them were, guess what? 4 pictures of mules that C. Don Ensor had painted. A mule called Great Kate, kind of a white, you might call her gray, but I'd call her a white mule. Her name was Great Kate. It was my favorite. There was a mule called Beck. She was kind of a skinny, dark colored mule. There's a mule called, or one of the paintings was called Stubborn As, and it was another dark colored mule. And then there was a mule called Old Pete, and he was what I'd call a strawberry blonde mule. He's kind of a pale reddish brown with a white nose. Those 4 mules were amongst these hundreds of pictures. And guess what? I wanted those mules. People kept going up there and sorting through them and getting the ones they want when they got choice. They had them all mixed up, and I couldn't tell which ones had my mules in it and which one didn't. And they finally got down to a certain amount of pictures left, and I hadn't seen anybody carry off any mules. And so they took them and they stacked them up in stacks across there. They had 6 or 7 different stacks, the mules. They had 6 or 7 different stacks of limited edition prints for sale. And when they came to that table, they weren't selling choice picture anymore. They were selling choice stack. Well, if you've ever been down there when this lady from the Railroad Cafe in that antique store on Main Street in Mitchell, when she's there and she wants something, she just buys it almost and pays whatever it takes to buy it. You might as well, you're wasting your time if you try to bid against her. So there was still something in this stack of pictures that she wanted. And I suspected I knew what it was, because amongst the artwork in there was somebody who had taken photographs and painted pictures of old railroad stations and old trains and old locomotives and old water towers, things like that were railroad related. There was a lot of that stuff in there. And she had already picked through there and bought a lot of that stuff, but there was still a few more in there. And so she was bidding, and she was making the stack of pictures cost more than I wanted to pay. So once again, I was of the opinion that I couldn't afford a mule. Well, it got down to 3 stacks, and she went back in the back to try to buy some of that stuff that Tom was selling. And so I figured that the railroad stuff was all gone, or she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they started the bid again, and I bid up to a certain amount, and I got the bid. So I went up there and I started sorting through, and I couldn't find. Finally, I did find a mule in one of the stacks. So I thought I'd gotten a pretty good look at everything, and I thought, well, maybe next time it'll bring a little less. And I saw that there was still some railroad stuff in some of those. I took one stack, one that had the mule called Great Kate in it. When they came back around, she was still back there, and I bid on them again. This time I got them even cheaper than the first time. So I went up there and sorted through them again, and I found 2 more mules. Lucky me, and they was in the same stack. I took that stack. When they got back around to it again, she still wasn't around. They sold the last stack, and they sold it really cheap, and I just bought it. Didn't know what was in it. I went through all of them then, and I had 3 of the 4 mules that I'd seen. At that point in time, I didn't know that Don Enser had painted what he called a series of paintings, and the set was 4 mules, those same 4 mules that were represented in this sale today, 4 different pictures. He had painted of mules at different time, a different mule. And so there was a set of 4. I didn't know that at the time. I found that out later, but I had 3 of the 4 mules that I wanted, so I was a pretty happy guy. I suspected that the lady that runs the Railroad Cafe and that antique shop in Mitchell, I can't remember her name. I wished I could. I'd give her a good plug. She's a nice lady, and she's got an antique shop. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, Main Street in Mitchell. I suspected she had my 4th mule, so a little bit later, she was up there in the front again, sitting and bidding on stuff, and I went over and I waited until she wasn't bidding, and I introduced myself to her, and I said, I bought some of those pictures. All I really wanted were the ones that were mules. And I got mostly what I wanted, but there's still a mule somewhere, and I suspect you got it. She said, I have no idea. I was buying railroad pictures. And I said, that's what I thought you were doing. And so here's what I'm going to propose to you. I have some railroad related stuff in the pictures I bought. It's not what I wanted. So if you'd like, I'll trade you my railroad stuff for a mule if you have one. And she said she'd be happy to do that. And she said, why don't you come by the shop after a while, and we'll go through. And so that's what I did. I went and I found my mule that I wanted, and I just gave her all the railroad pictures that I had and took that mule. Now, I've had little pictures of mules. In fact, I have one hanging over there on the wall of Great Kate. It's this little picture about this big, it's in a frame. It's that same print, see Don Enser, only it's just a small one. It's not signed or numbered or anything. It's just something I bought at a yard sale, Great Kate. She's hanging over on the wall, and right up there above her is another picture, and I don't know whether that's Stubborn As or Beck. It's one of those two, and I bought it at a yard sale too. I found it one day. There was an old horseshoe, and they'd used that old horseshoe to frame that mule picture, and I bought it at a yard sale. So I got 2 small pictures hanging over there, and I got frames for the other pictures that I bought. And so now over there I've got Old Pete, and I've got Stubborn As hanging on the wall over there. From being a young man, 21, 22 years old, wanting a mule, I finally have some mules, my mules. And of course, right up above them, there's a sign that said Mules for Sale. So I don't really think I'm going to sell those last 2. And I made this video to tell you that I sold 2 of my mules already. I waited, took me 50 years to finally be able to afford mules. And when I got them hanging on the wall. I decided to put a price on them. I did put some of them on Facebook Marketplace, and had a lady that she had started a collection of them herself. She had 3 of the 4 mules of the original collection, and I had the 4th one. She wanted it, and she didn't want the frame. She wanted me to take it out of the frame and mail it to her, because she was down there in Kentucky somewhere, and the freight was going to be more than the picture probably. So I didn't want to do that. I was afraid I'd damage the print somehow, or it's not be able to ship it. But I knew what she was talking about shipping that much glass. Something was going to go bad with that. So we messed around there, and finally we agreed on a price, and I did what she asked. I took back out of the frame that she was in, and put it in a cardboard container and taped it all up and sent it to her. So Beck was gone. I was down to 3 mules. I took my Beck and old Pete were in a Facebook ad together, and so I took that ad down. I marked one of them as sold and took the other one down. I still had Great Kate up there. I decided I wasn't going to sell Great Kate either, but I was going to let the ad run out. I didn't want to sell any more of my mules. Well, a gal called me, and she liked Great Kate. She wanted it. She tried to negotiate a better price, and most of the times that tactic works. I like to sell stuff, and so I will negotiate a little if it helps me sell something. But I was so fond of that mule, and not really. I was afraid. I told her. I just answered her back in the text, and I said, I think I'd have seller's remorse if I did that. I'm not even sure getting full price is not going to cause me to have seller's remorse when I let Kate go. But if you want her, I will sell her for the price that she's advertised at. And she said she'd get back with me. And I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes later, she got back with me, and she said, I want that mule. And so we made arrangements for her to come and get it, and she came and got it. And she was going to give it to, I don't know whether there's her mother or mother-in-law, but she was going to give it to them because they had mules, and she thought it'd make a nice gift for them. But when she got here and saw it, she fell in love with it herself. She said, "Well, they lost out. I'm keeping that mule." Anyway, I met a new acquaintance, knew some of her family already. The ex-wife of her father-in-law. Turns out one of the girls that I knew was a half sister, I think, to her husband. So we had a good discussion about that. We had a good discussion about the new house she was building. We just had a good time. She enjoyed being out here and seeing things, and she's going to come back and get some stuff. She's building a modern version of an old farmhouse on some property that her and her husband have, and I'm just tickled to death for her. Glad my mule found a good home. Glad to make a new friend. But I've decided that I've sold all the Don C. Answer mules that I'm going to sell. So I'm in pursuit again now of finding the 2 that I sold to complete my set again. I'm going to buy them at a price where I can justify having sold my other ones. So that means I got to buy them for less than I sold those last ones for, or I've just kicked myself. That's my mule story for the day. It started in late 1960s, early 1970s, when it took me 50-some years to finally get the mules paintings that I wanted. And not too long after I got them, I sold half of them. But you know, the hard times guy, you know that wasn't that big a surprise. Till the next time, you have a good day.